Hello and welcome to the bets.com.au betting recap, a new series that we're doing on the bets.com.au YouTube channel. And we thought it's a good way to do some long form content, get into the sport and the betting stuff, and give a bit of reasoning behind the stuff that we do so you can follow along in all the videos over the weekends. With me, my main man,
Mm,
Jez. We're both writers at bets.com.au. I don't know. I just keep talking. I don't know. I should just
mm.
stop.
You should stop. You should stop. There's going to be enough babbling on about our tipping tactics. So keep the intro nice and short. That's it. Let's go straight into it. Let's not
Let's
muck
get into
around
it.
here.
All right. So the premise of the show, like I said, we look back at the weekend that was and dive into our tips a little bit. And first of all, look at our results. And Jez, how did we go in NRL
Mm.
last weekend in round 8?
Well, it's pretty typical when we come up with the idea to make this new show, new program. Been on a hot streak, obviously. That's why you want to talk about your wins. But Murphy's Law, create a show about how good we are at betting and how we put our predictions together, and we hit 30% this week. So we went we went 9 from 24. We had a bit of a tough week, but it makes this show though. It doesn't really matter how we tip, as long as we can give the reasoning why. And I think it sets up for a good premiere show because we can discuss about how we went into some games based on some of the statistics that we do look at, and then how the actual game played out in a completely different way against a lot of the trends and the top statistics that we do use to make our predictions. So there's a couple of games in here that we will break down where, things went right, but then there's the other side where the game didn't go so well, but the reasoning behind it is definitely there and it's evident. So I think it gives a really, really good explanation of obviously sticking to the long game, as we like to say, because some weeks it goes good and some games go good and some games don't. That's the joys of betting, especially when you're looking at these like 190 type of markets that are set to be basically 50%, and they're the ones we're trying to get the edge on, obviously. So I think so all in all, 9 from 24. We had a couple of strikeouts. Well, when we say I had a couple of strikeouts where we went 0 for 3. We generally taking a tip, obviously 2 tips about the game and then picking a try scorer. So so 9 for 24 is not great, but it makes
Do we
things a
have an
little bit
ROI on any
interesting.
of that, or is it just
No, I do not.
no?
On
Okay.
Not this week.
Next week
But
we'll
we will
have that.
next week. We'll start throwing stuff in our betting tracker again and getting all those numbers, because that's also a really interesting point. Sometimes you don't have to hit 50% to be making money, because you're getting on the right side of some of these bets that are paying a little bit higher than 190. So you can move lines and do things like that to get on the good side of the money and the
Mm.
value. So
All right, first game up to look at, and it was one that was, I think, a surprise to many, and it was the
mm,
Bulldogs getting absolutely manhandled by
mm,
the Brisbane Broncos. Now, Jez, you wrote this write up on bets.com.au.
mm,
It was out early in the week, and your kind of narrative here was the the doggies, their defense, and their form to start the season should have continued against the Brisbane team that have been a little bit inconsistent in against some of these opponents. Give us your thoughts on how you went into this game.
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there about when it comes to Brisbane is they hadn't showed any real consistency throughout this year. They had some big numbers when it comes to attack. I think they'll rank second heading into this week in points scored, but they were based around 2 extremely big results that Brisbane did have, where they put up close to 50, which they ended up doing on the best defensive team in the competition. So, but it was all based around the inconsistency of Brisbane and the consistency of Canterbury. They were 6-0, and mainly the way that they have been playing because it's just been so methodical. Cameron Ciraldo has been, yeah, drumming into them. It's all about winning possession, working your opponents down, wearing them down, and then taking your opportunities, obviously, when you get them. But this game was completely different because Canterbury it fell apart really really early for them, and they were just on the back foot. And then the rain came, and it made everything obviously much more difficult. But I think when you're breaking it down, like the main key stats heading into this game was Canterbury were first in run meters in the NRL. They were first in possession, and they were also second in tackles inside opposition 20. So there is sort of a grey area around how important tackles inside the opposition 20 are, but it's all about sort of working out how do teams need to build pressure to score, and do some teams don't need to build pressure. But it's also a really really key statistic for us because it shows where you're playing the game, where the game is being played. And what Canterbury have done over the first few weeks were really compress their opponents inside their own 20. So playing down there and then also making the other team then work out of there. A lot of the times they weren't forcing kicks, they were taking tackles, especially in the first half. Take the fifth tackle option, take the tackle and make your opponent work out of their 1-2 meter line, because that's where you're getting tackled on your last play. So so this game sort of obviously didn't play out that way. They dropped the ball on their first set, and then yeah, Xavier Willison scored in the 3rd minute or something like that, and then they got a penalty, and then they got a sin bin, and they just went into this whole quicksand play. But I think when you're breaking down the stats of that game, you really sort of see the reason why we took the tips that we took. And then obviously it was just a game that didn't go the way of the Canterbury Bulldogs. And it's a reason why I think we both agree that when you're looking at tipping next week, you're going to tip the same way, because this was just a game that just went all wrong early for Canterbury. And
Do you
you can
think that
see,
it's about more so the Dogs' attack, or was it their defense that broke down, or was it a combination of two? Because some of the similar stats you said about their attack, they were exactly the same defensively. They were first in opposition run meters, the lowest amount of
mm,
run meters allowed to
mm,
any opposition. First in opposition possession, second in opposition territory, second in opposition tackles inside 20. But
mm,
Brisbane put 42 points on them.
mm,
And there was also in that game, it was the first half and the second half were completely different
e-
games.
exactly right.
And
Like,
I think it felt that they were exactly like your point there is that that first half with everything that happened, those situational occurrences, it put them in quicksand. It is exactly
mm,
the words you said, and it
mm,
didn't allow them to play their normal game, which would have been the run meters and the building of pressure and matching up on defense because they had guys off the field. You've seen in
yeah.
the second half when things started to even out a bit more and they worked themselves into the game, they actually won the second half 18-6 or whatever it was.
Yeah, yeah, you're 100% right. Like, you look at the statistics of that first half, and the first half ended, was it 34-0, I believe. But it was like you look at the run, like, first of all, possession was 60% to 40%, which is a very very big difference. And you'll hear what 60% and 40% actually means when it comes down to the base stats. Was Brisbane had 93 runs to the Bulldogs 48. And then obviously that transcribed into 751 run meters to just 322 run meters. So, like we said, like, Canterbury were the best in offense and defense in the run meter statistic, and that just didn't happen in that first half because they had 40% of the ball, and
Mm.
they also obviously had a sin bin. So it just didn't play out that way because of just all the things that went wrong. It just felt like everything Brisbane did, they got rewarded for, and Canterbury just couldn't get it together. So
And to
that's
that point,
why.
the Broncos, they were coming into this weekend 13th in run meters, and
Mm,
they actually had fewer run meters in this game than their season average. but still
Mm,
managed to put 42 points on. And if you
mm,
say, okay, over 1,000 different games, the odds of that happening again are extremely low. That
mm,
they go under their run meters and they're the fourth worst team in run meters in the league, but still
mm.
score 42 points.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah. Crazy. And then yeah, second half obviously things turned around for Canterbury. They got it together, which is kudos to them because I said they shouldn't have even come out in the second half. Should have just packed up and gone home right there. But they came out. They did something that's very positive for their season. Another reason why we will be looking to take Canterbury again. I don't even know who they're playing, but you'll be taking them to do all the things that they did the first 6 games and not in that 7th game because they did it in the second half. They won the second half. They the second half went exactly how you thought the whole game was going to go.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
they were going to chip away. Brisbane were going to score, 1 try, 2 tries in the game, whatever, and Canterbury were going to just wear them down because the possession evened out to 50-50. The territory went into Canterbury's way, 54% to 46%. They won the runs. They won the run meters. They had 3 line breaks to 0. Like, just what a tale of 2 halves.
yeah, yeah.
So that's our excuse of why we went 1 from 3 because he hit Marcelo Montoya to score the try. But
No, I
yeah,
think
but
it's
that's
very
why
interesting
obviously you
that
go 0 and 2 on those 2 tips of unders for the game. I think I picked under the first half
mm,
scoreline because I figured there would be a grind, field position play, good kicking from Adam Reynolds was the narrative behind that, and then Canterbury to win 1-12, but
mm,
that obviously didn't happen.
no. But I think it gains a little bit more insight into how you're thinking when you're putting those tips out and the
Mm,
narrative you're building around the game. Um, as I said, in 995 games out of 1,000, that happens. But we just managed to get that one of those 5 that is fantastic about rugby league and keeps throwing up
mm.
curveballs to us every single
Yeah,
weekend.
sports in general, really, isn't it?
Yeah. All right, let's move on to game number 2. And it's a game that I covered, the New Zealand Warriors and Newcastle Knights. Now, this one felt a little bit straightforward. You had the Warriors that were on some really good form. The Knights at the other end of the table, probably through the NRL history of the NRL, one of the worst scoring sides. Yeah, in the last when did the NRL come? 98,
Mm.
20,
It's,
almost 30 years. They're the
wow.
third worst scoring team. So I think it was only the Bulldogs of the early 2020s and a Dragons team from a few years back that have been worse through the first 7 rounds. But my thought coming into this game was purely around the Newcastle attack and that they wouldn't be able to get together. And I've been on it essentially since last season that they have a problem in their halves and they still
Mm,
haven't sorted it out. They knew the problem going into the off season, and there was a lot of talk in the media around how they would settle on their halves and get 2 halves in, work the whole off season to have that creativity and attack on the goal line because they were doing really well defensively and they were doing quite well in moving up the field. And it was just once they get into that 20-meter zone, they weren't converting their chances.
mm,
And it's even kind of similar. They're 11th heading into the weekend. They're 11th in total run meters or average run meters per game in the league. So not fantastic, but still doing okay. Their run meters numbers aren't as bad as their scoring numbers.
mm,
Also 11th in getting tackles inside the opposition 20. And then it all just breaks down. And the reliance on Kalen Ponga, and now you've seen the last 2 weeks that teams have got a game plan of how to shut him down. They work up on the outside edges and get in his face and don't allow him to get into open field and broken play where he's most dangerous. If he has the pressure on him straight away, he can't make those passes out the back and he can't do his little jigs and steps, which create the broken play, and then you have guys like Bradman Best or Gags, whoever, going through for those line breaks that they are getting. So you've seen that last 2 weeks, and then you, on the flip side, you look at the Warriors, and my thoughts here were the outside backs and the back rowers were going to be pushing those run meters to get on top of Newcastle in the midfield, and that's essentially how the game played out.
Mm.
Nickel Klokstad, 216 run meters. Tuapiki, 132 run meters. Pompey, 140. And then you even look into forwards. Halasima, 130 meters. Aaron Clark, 115. So,
Hasn't Aaron Clark been a phenomenon since he's come there? Like
oh,
it's another typical Gold Coast Titans tragic story. Is like these guys play and do nothing at the Titans, and then go, and he's been a
yeah,
superstar for them. Like
yeah.
he's been, like, you thought
It's
they were
just,
going to really struggle without Tohu Harris,
yeah.
and he's just filled that void, at least like on the field. Obviously not the leadership that Harris has, but he's definitely done the work. Like,
Mm. Just
yeah, he's
Mr.
been really
Consistent.
impressive. Mm.
Yeah. And also them
Yeah.
losing Jazz Tavanga, I think
Mm.
he's filled the hole of both of those guys because he can play um, in essentially the same role that Tavanga had, but at a
Mm.
little bit of a higher rate. The Warriors, they were fourth in run meters heading into the weekend, as I alluded to, and first, like overwhelmingly first, 43 and a half tackles inside 20
Mm.
per game. And what we saw at the start of the season was they were having trouble converting, and that was, I think, to do with the the changes in the roster. Metcalf coming in for Sean Johnson. It took him a little bit of time to warm into the role and hit those combinations, but you've seen the last
Mm.
couple of games now it's on song, and they're hitting and they're scoring, and
Mm.
it's they're converting the chances. They're still getting to the chances, and now they're converting them, and they're putting points on. Um, I think, I mean, my narrative essentially played out exactly like as I thought. The Warriors maybe just scored a little bit too much on the
Mm.
Knights' defense. I picked the 1 to 12, which didn't hit. The trend of that head to head being 1 to 12 has been trying to find 7 straight games between these two
Mm.
teams have been those close margins, and those, though that 1 to 12 or it goes to 14 can be so reliant on a goal kick from the sideline, or if a guy runs the ball around. And I think there was, um, wasn't there in this I know game where a guy ran around, almost got tackled from behind and lost the ball, or was that the
Yeah.
Titans game? I can't remember, but anyway, I think that the narrative was there. It was a relatively close game on the scoreboard, but Newcastle were never going to win this game with the lack of attack. Jackson Ford I had as a try scorer. Now he didn't start the game, so I put this game on and I was looking for him on the field because they were attacking, and I was like, where is he? He was a late switch to the bench, but he came off the bench and scored 2 tries.
Mm.
So had he started, then there would have been a chance, I think, for that first try scorer, which is paying about
What was
$50.
the reasoning behind the Jackson Ford? Like, I know it's obviously easier for us when you're picking try scorers is looking at these outside backs, but what was the narrative behind the Jackson Ford pick?
So I looked a little bit at his. Oh no! So it was my thought in a low scoring game. Um, the game total between these two teams, 9 of 11 games have gone under since
Mm.
2019. So in my head, my narrative, it's a short margin, it's a low scoring game. Newcastle, say what you want about their attack, their defense is still pretty solid. They're keeping teams to a relatively low score.
Mm.
Um, so you look at the odds of a try scorer, and it's okay, a winger's likely to score. They're the most likely player to score in any game, but the odds you're getting were so low compared to the chances in my head of a try being scored. So then I
Mhm.
immediately start thinking, okay, what forward can I look at to increase the value of my pick around a try scorer? Because I think there's going to be so few tries scored. It's better to
Mm.
take a guy that is paying a lot more and jag that rather than take a winger and
Mm.
him not score because this is so few tries scored. So that was my first train of thought: is look for a forward, and I looked a little bit through try scoring form against the Knights, and Jackson Ford popped out straight away. He'd scored 2 tries in his last 4 games against the Knights. Um, and the Knights had allowed a couple of tries to forward. So eight tries in their last 5 games have gone to forwards.
Mm-hmm.
So against the Knights. So forwards were
There you go.
scoring at quite a high rate against the Knights over the last 5 games. So that kind of just reinforced my idea about look to the forwards, try and find some value. Who of the forwards is likely to score? Where on the field are they positioned? And Jackson Ford just kind of popped out at me. And then I dived a little bit further into his try scoring form, and it was just served on a platter to me.
Mm. Well done. They're the good ones.
Yeah.
Saves your weekend, because that's the thing. Obviously, we didn't record return on investment, but even though you can have a bad week, we probably weren't too far off, because obviously we hit Jackson Ford at a really high rate. We
Yeah, he was
got to
paying $10.
yeah, there you go. So you get that. You also hit pups on the first try scorer, which are like bonus bets that I guess we use to boost the boost the kitty. And sometimes we always talk about going 3 from 3, but if you hit the first try scorer, then you've definitely gone 4 from 4. So that one only pops up when you
When
hit
you
it.
win. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But that's the joys of it. But it is like that's the sort of stuff that you can do to
Mm.
that can save a weekend. You snag one of
Yeah.
these, and all of a sudden you've turned a bad weekend into an okay weekend,
Mm.
and that's
And
what you've got to do in the long game.
I think as well with the Knights, until you see something which tells you that their attack has changed,
Mm.
as long as that number doesn't keep going down, I mean, I think you're getting him at 18.5 for the last couple of weeks. This week it was 16.5.
Yeah,
But if it's 16.5 again this weekend, and they're playing, to double check who they're playing. But I think you keep hammering the unders on the Newcastle Knights, because over the duration of your betting, you're going to keep hitting that, because there's nothing to tell you that they are capable of scoring that amount of points on a weekly basis
mm.
against anybody. So they're playing the
Yeah. So they're
Rabbitohs
playing
this weekend.
South, and it's 20.5.
There you go.
So that'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. You heard it here first. That take the under on the on the
Yeah.
Newcastle Knights at 20.5 against South, who, yeah, I think it's because South have been a little bit ordinary, but still they were okay against Melbourne. It was bad weather, but so
Yeah.
it's hard to read
So
into those games.
just in a kind of looking at the numbers, so we use predictive modeling with a Pythagorean expectation and across multiple years. So just on this year's results alone, South Sydney were predicted to allow 36 points to Melbourne.
Mm.
And if you just, on base value, Newcastle more than half as good at scoring points as what Melbourne are.
Mm.
No way. So it's
No.
like, okay, well, just using the predictive modeling, are Newcastle likely to score 20 points against the Rabbitohs? No.
No way.
So,
No.
yeah. All right. Third and final
Mm.
game. Another one that you had.
Yeah. So this one was as positive as it can be, really. Without going 4 from 4, but hit 3 from 3. So on the North Queensland Gold Coast. Now, yeah, I think the narrative was pretty clear how bad the Gold Coast defense has been, but North Queensland had been. Oh, well, they started 0-3, and then they pretty much turned their whole season around. Over one weekend, and have gone 3 from 0. So I think the challenge for this one was, I believe the line was at 8.5. I'm just going to bring up the game bet.
That's
Can't
why you're doing
obviously.
that. Can just do a shout out. Bets.com.au. You can see it up here. Do game previews for all the AFL, NRL. It's not just us writing. There are a couple other guys as well that contribute, and all free. and you will try and find the best markets for each bet as well, so you don't have to do the trouble shopping around on different markets.
Yeah. So the line on this game was at 8.5, and obviously the Cowboys had a couple of good wins. The Gold Coast had been losing a lot, but definitely was really, really confident taking North Queensland to cover the 8.5 points. And then their team total as well at 28.5 also tipped the over with Murray Tuolangi to score. Now, like there was just some really, really key stuff. The North Queensland, even looking how bad their start of their season was, they were still ranked fairly well when it comes to those key stats that we talk about. So, and especially even defensively, which was quite surprising, is that, well, offensively, we'll talk about because they
Defensively,
were
they
ranked.
weren't great.
Sorry,
I just clicked into
defensively,
it
they
now.
weren't
So
that great. But offensively, they ranked sixth in run meters and sixth in territory. And that's pretty much what we've based everything on, because in reverse, you look at the Gold Coast and they were average in both in attack and in defense. The Gold Coast ranked
yeah,
12th in, we talk in
fifth,
attack, they were ranked. You go.
I was trying to
If you're
help you
going to,
out there. They were 15th defensively. They were 15th
yeah.
in opposition run meters, 16th in opposition possession, 15th in opposition line breaks. So
Mm.
their defensive
And
patterns
territory.
against, yeah,
Yeah. And then in offense, it wasn't much better. They had nothing ranked higher than 12th. So in those categories. So it was pretty clear that that's how it was going to go. And the Titans had been giving up. There was I think 3 games in a row where they gave up 30 plus points. And when it comes to North Queensland, they gave up. Get the exact number for you, but they were giving up like I'm having real trouble finding my
what do
windows
you
as
want?
usual. No, it's yeah, so they
20,
gave up 104 points in their first 3 matches, North Queensland, when they went 0-3. And then they gave up 50 points less in their following 3 matches. So they gave up
wow.
54 points total in their following 3 matches. So that just, yeah, points that they got their attitude right. They sorted things out. They were still able to score points, and that's where I think the confusion come, where I thought that they were better defensively over the whole year, but it was those last 3 games, because they're ranked extremely low because those first 3 games were awful. They were still scoring points but couldn't defend. They sorted out their defense and they started to win games. So
Yeah.
coming up against the Titans, who just have been average in every aspect, it was a pretty clear cut bet that you could have go in quite confident. And it was also even sort of looking there at a 13 plus win privately when I'm doing my bets, but taking a little bit more of a risk. So
How much when you're calculating these things and you look at the trends we have in the articles, betting trends on the season, and you see
mm,
that the Titans 5 games this year have been decided by 13 plus points,
mm.
and 3 of those are losses. Do you take that into account when you're kind of doing your predictions?
I think it depends how other things play out. Like I was sort of a little bit more. Um,
Or do you
just looking
have
at the
that as
different
a
trends.
bit of context when you're looking at the 4 major stats around run meters, line breaks, tackles inside 20,
I,
and then you
I,
say, okay, well, if that is weighted like this, and then you also have the 13 plus, then you thought, okay, well, these things are correlating to each other.
Mm, I think I look a lot at the opposition. When it comes to those margins, you sort of see, okay, who beat the Titans by that much, and then you're looking at the 3 wins of the Cowboys. I think that's why I safed it, even though we sort of felt that it was going to be a bigger match. The Cowboys won by 10, 4, and 8 in their 3 victories. So, but they played Canberra, Penrith, South Sydney. So it wasn't anybody that was. Um, extremely strong. Obviously, Canberra are now proving to be a stronger side than we give them credit for, at least early in the season, as we see what happens later on. But yeah, I think that was what was the main reason why we didn't sort of take the risk of putting out a tip for 13 plus in that game, even though everything may have pointed in that direction from the Gold Coast Titans side. So yeah, I think a lot goes into consideration when you're looking at those certain trends, especially with margins. You've really got to consider strength of schedule for both teams and current form.
Yeah. Anything more to pick out from this game before we wrap things up?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Nice. All right, let's look ahead quickly before we finish up the show at round 9 and any kind of quick bets we can throw out to the viewers. Now, don't forget to write in the comments, follow, subscribe, but let us know if what games you want to kind of pull out and want us to break down and talk about in terms of how we build the narrative around our betting, and also maybe why we think it's working or why we think it's not working. As we said, next week we'll have a bit more to show you in graphics, as well as our ROI on the bets we've done. Probably won't be counting back from round 1, but for the last couple of rounds, last week at least, and this week.
Maybe the week before, because the return on investment should have been a little bit better.
It was good, yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a drag just recording all of that stuff. It's so many different numbers. But this week, Magic Round.
No, that's next week, right?
No,
it's round 9. Magic Round, round 10.
No.
Yeah. Oh, it is Magic Round. Magic Round already.
That's why there's Origin as well, which we have to Women's Origin, which we're writing this week as well.
All right. Okay. All right. I always thought Magic Round was always round 10.
I think it has been a couple the last 2 years, but
always. I said always round 10. The last 2 years. That's as long as the memory goes.
I mean, Penrith Panthers, or Brisbane Broncos rather, only 2.5 point favourites against Penrith, and like I don't understand that line, considering Brisbane's scoring form and Penrith's defense. I think that's an early one. You can take an alternate line on Brisbane to win by over a converted try, and you're pushing up to almost $3, I'd say, or $2.50.
That's crazy, man.
Any game that stick out for you? 220. You get them for 6.5.
That's nuts.
Warriors and Cowboys. It's going to be a tough one to handicap, I would feel, given the comparative kind of defense and offense numbers.
Yeah, but New Zealand have been, I don't know, I would feel pretty strongly straight away for North Queensland, purely because of New Zealand playing outside of New Zealand. They're just not as efficient.
Did Parramatta beat Cronulla?
What is happening with Cronulla? Just on a quiet note, like they've just lost the plot.
Those numbers, I think, once we do the predictive modelling, we'll get a bit more of an idea about where these numbers are in comparison to what the bookies have. Because I feel straight off looking at the numbers, the handicap numbers, like I think the Parramatta game has definitely been brought back in with Moses and the result they had 2 weeks ago, because you would never have thought that Parramatta were going to just be 5.5 point underdogs. Roosters and Dolphins only 1.5 on their handicap.
To the Roosters. And that's also interesting. The Roosters haven't been playing that well, and the Dolphins had been playing well until, they just leaked too many points. They had a really, really bad second half against Canberra, and
it was the last 6 minutes of the game.
But I think it was 28-10 at halftime, and they lost the 28-10 lead. So,
Yeah.
which is nuts. So I don't know. I'd be inclined for an upset there, and taking the Dolphins. What else? I think, yeah, like Gold Coast Titans, Canterbury Bulldogs at 10.5, but Canterbury going to have a few suspensions this week, so
Four
it's
guys.
yeah, so it could be a weekend to stay away from Canterbury, just because after that loss, and then
With that said, though,
which
when they
is
were missing Burton earlier in the year and they were missing Kikau and
mm,
they were winning, they were doing
mm,
like, because I remember I wrote the game, like, these guys are out. There's no way they're winning. And they
mm,
come out and pump some team.
mm.
So,
And then it's Gold Coast 13. You look at that 13 plus. The line's 10.5. But it is scary because you just don't know how a team responds after a loss that they took, and then a bit of negativity. But you would expect that their defense is going to be able to do the job this week. Like, that's
yeah.
obviously all they're going to be talking about this week. So it could be, yeah, the over unders at 47.5. It's also tough. We have to break it down a little bit more, I think, before we say what side we think that's going on. To be honest,
Sit
it
on
is
the
scary.
fence.
Sitting on the fence. I was all about just back Canterbury this week. They're going to have no problem, but the bookies are good. They make lines that are tough to call.
Mm. All right. There we go. First one of these recap episodes done and dusted. As I said
Mm,
earlier, let us know in the comments what games you want to have us focus on each week. And if this gets a bit of popularity, then we even look at maybe doing a similar preview for the upcoming week and dive into the bets before they
mm,
actually happen. Fantastic. All right.
mm.
Thanks for today. Don't forget
Thank
to
you.
subscribe and follow. And Jez, I'll see you around, big boy.
See you, mate. Have a good week.